Chapter 1788 Flashpoint. Chapter 1788 Flashpoint. After the palace lord finished speaking, he turned his attention to Yi Futian again and said, Futian, go to the ancestral land, take the thing away, and take your people back to the Heavenly Mandate Academy. Yi Futian was stunned when he heard the words of the palace lord. Was he entrusting him with his last will and testament? The palace lord of the Divine Palace was already a top giant in the 3,000 realms of the Great Path. It is very difficult for anyone to touch him at his level of cultivation. But now he was acting so pessimistic because clearly, he realized just how difficult the situation was in front of them. What alarmed Yi Futian even more was that the palace lord wanted him to go to the ancestral land and take the thing away. Obviously, he understood just what he was asked to take away. The divine item placed in the ancestral land by the Shun clan. Back when he was cultivating in the ancestral land, he had talked about it with the mysterious cultivator in the ancestral land. This divine item was something that could attract others' greed, and it could become a source of atrocity. Today's situation could very well be, because people had come for it. The palace lord of the Divine Palace knew very well that Yi Futian was his best chance. Except for the Heavenly Mandate Academy, no one else could hold on to the divine item in the ancestral land. Therefore, he placed his hope on the Heavenly Mandate Academy and wished that it would carry the fire of the Divine Palace, while also allowing Yi Futian to get away with his people. Here was a dispute between the Divine Palace and the Golden Divine Nation. Now it seemed that even if Yi Futian were to be involved, it would not change the situation much. He could already felt that the other side had dispatched several giant figures, and among them, there was probably some existence of great capability from the Divine Prefecture. Under such circumstances, they really had no chance of winning. Yi Futian did not leave as he had asked, but looked at him instead and said softly, Does the palace lord really think that this is just a matter involving the Divine Palace? Some things could not be avoided, no matter what. The Golden Divine Nation wanted to deal a blow to the Divine Palace. Today, all the forces were here, and other realms within the 9 realms had also launched a siege remotely, so that it was impossible for their reinforcements to arrive. What appeared to be moves that only targeted the Divine Palace was, in fact, also going against the alliance made with the Heavenly Mandate Academy. Palace Lord, all the allied force with the Heavenly Mandate Academy would be with you whether in victory or in defeat, Yi Futian said. None of them had any way out. In the face of such turmoil, if they abandoned the Divine Palace and sought to save themselves, they might become the next target. It was very simple to find a reason for war, just like the attacks launched today at the Divine Palace, which was nothing more than a made-up accusation. It was ridiculous to claim that the Divine Palace was enabling Yi Futian and refused to open up the ancestral land for cultivation. The Heavenly Mandate Academy and the Divine Palace were already bound together, and in this alliance, none of them could survive on their own. Palace Lord, the current situation is no longer something that can be avoided. The fate of the entire alliance is in our hands. Even if the situation is pessimistic, there is no other way but forward, Yi Futian continued. After hearing what he had to say, the palace lord nodded slightly. Of course, he understood all this, but the Divine Palace was a preaching holy land, and those who cultivated in the palace were compassionate and gentle to the world. All that the palace lord could think of was to defend the Divine Palace himself, and let the others leave to save themselves. However, people are different. He was using his own train of thoughts to judge the situation, but had ignored the opponents. Neither the Shun clan nor the Golden Divine Nation were gentle or harmless. Palace Lord, this battle is inevitable, Lord Taixian also spoke. Although the situation they faced had just become clearer to him, there was no way they could avoid deaths and injuries now. Only by fighting with all they've got could there be a chance for survival. The Palace Lord looked into the distance as he levitated into the air. His divine consciousness shrouded the land. Above the sea of the path, those boats floated on the surface of the sea, and his voice was heard loud and clear. Gai Qiong, as a cultivator under the Great Emperor, you have provoked this storm in the upper heavens realm, destroyed the divine Swordly family, brought in foreign forces into the upper heavens realm, and coerce all the principalities to follow. Now you are leading the army to Shangxiao Divine Palace to stir things up. If one day the great emperor were to question you, what will you say? Gaiqiong had been staying beneath Gaitsong. In this battle, Gaitsong would take the lead. As a cultivator under the great emperor, it was awkward for him to be at the forefront. It was also because of this that they found a pretext to invade the Divine Palace. With the right excuse, they would be able to guard against any future interventions by the great emperor. Of course, he also understood that the great emperor had rarely interfered in the matters inside the Void Realm. Even the matters of the Divine Prefecture could no longer interest the great emperor much. Nonsense. The Divine Palace has soiled the name of the preaching Holy Land, and it should be replaced by a better preaching Holy Land to preach in the upper heavens realm. This in itself is executing the will of the great emperor. The future of the upper heavens realm will only be more prosperous, and the future preaching Holy Land in the upper heavens realm will only be more selfless. Nothing so self-centered like the Divine Palace had been, Gaiqiong said loudly. He spoke with a booming voice that swept through the endless void. For many years, the Shangxiao Divine Palace has not interfered with the disputes of the outside world, nor had we participated in external struggles. Only when the army of darkness descended, did we go to the aid of the Heavenly Mandate Academy in order to maintain the order of the 9 realms. This was witnessed by everyone. The Palace Lord continued, however today, I'm afraid the Divine Palace would have to make an exception. The rules that we have abided by for many years will be broken today. Since everyone who remains is willing to fight together, the Divine Palace is no longer a preaching Holy Land, but just a simple school now. I will do everything in my power to protect the Divine Palace to ensure its safety. Therefore, from this moment on, anyone who steps inside the Divine Palace will be killed without mercy. The voice of the Palace Lord of the Divine Palace was loud and clear. It spread throughout the void. At this time, his clothing fluttered behind him despite the lack of wind. His person was full of murderous aura. Today, he would no longer care for the common people, nor worried about preaching and protecting the world. Today, his only concern was to guard the Divine Palace. Anyone who wanted to destroy the Divine Palace was his enemies that would be killed without exception. No matter what would happen in the future, no matter whether this battle would take the upper heaven realm backward, on this day, he had chosen the Divine Palace. All those within 1,000 miles of the Divine Palace, leave immediately. Otherwise, you will be regarded as a threat. If you take action, no mercy will be shown to you. The Palace Lord continued, now go. Above the sea of the path, as all the boats floated on the surface of the water, those who heard the words of the Palace Lord couldn't help but tremble in their hearts. At this moment, the Palace Lord became aggressive and indifferent. No one is allowed to step within 1,000 miles of the Divine Palace, or they would be killed when the war began. Leave. If a war starts, it will inevitably affect the innocents. Those who are staying will be considered as participants of the war. The Palace Lord of the Divine Music Palace also spoke up, and suddenly a group of people turned around and left with incredible speed. Even though they had wanted to witness the battle that would determine the fate of the upper heavens realm up close, they had no choice but to leave upon the harsh words of the Divine Palace. This battle was about the survival of the Divine Palace. All the cultivators in the Divine Palace had made the determination that they would spare no one this day. When Gaitsong heard what Yi Futian said, his golden divine eyes focused in on him through the distance. It was as if the sharpness in his eyes could pierce through Yi Futian. He stood up from the golden throne. Above the sky, golden divine light poured down, covering the entire Divine Palace, as if the land above the Divine Palace was full of divine light. The golden divine nation, like extreme sharp spears, fell down to the land below. Gaitsong stretched out his hands, and a terrible rumbling sound came out. The endless golden light gathered in his hand, and a peerless divine spear appeared, piercing the void with its unparalleled brilliance. He stretched his arms forward, pointing his spear in the direction of the Divine Palace, and pronounced, "Today's battle is all for the future of the upper heavens realm. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: You can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. After Gai Qiong returned to the Golden Divine Nation, his way of handling things was indeed different, much more decisive than that of Gai Tsang. Whether it was the Divine Prefecture from the Outer Realm, or other realms within the 9 realms, they had leveraged the situation to launch a simultaneous attack, and created such bleak outlook for the Divine Palace. Even besides them, the Golden Divine Nation itself had 2 major figures here today, in addition to a few others from the Divine Prefecture by invitation, so they still had the upper hand. If counted in forces like theirs and the likes of the Solar Divine Nation, the situation would now be entirely one-sided. At this moment, Shen Gao frowned and looked up above the void. He had suddenly felt a sense of threat. Shen Gao was not the only one who realized it. Soon Shen Ji, who was beside him, as well as other powerful figures such as Gai Qiong, all raised their heads to look at the sky above. It was as if a very suppressive aura was blooming on top of them. Pust! Above the firmament, the sky seemed to be shattered. They saw a trail of blue divine light that tore through the void and traversed the sky. A divine sword imprinted in their minds. Watch out! Shen Gao and the others realized something, and all of them began to take action. An absolute spatial light screen now appeared around Shen Gao, sheltering all the cultivators from the Shen clan within it. Cultivators from other forces also took action, releasing extremely powerful will of the way and resistance. Pust! The sea of the path rushed backward, as the endless blue divine light sailed across the void and descended. Everything around it was pulverized. Shrilling screams came out from those who were touched by the blue divine light, as they turned into dust and disappeared into nothingness. People with strong cultivation managed to avoid it, or protected themselves with the great path. But even so, the blue divine light flooded the void. When the divine sword descended on the sea of the path, the blue divine light turned into rounds of light screens, sweeping all around, and pulverized many who had guarded themselves with the powers of the great path. The sea of the path was completely evaporated by the sword will, and a terrifying vortex appeared on the seabed, turning it into a vacuum. When the terrifying aura gradually dissipated, everyone looked in the front. Above the sea of the path, the blue divine sword was hanging there upside down, and an absolute destructive domain of Wei that surrounded them. Just now, there were many Renhuang-level cultivators who had perished. Many people looked a little flustered as they stared at the sword. They knew who was here. Even Gai Qiong, who came from the Divine Prefecture, knew to whom the sword belonged. More than 3 centuries ago, this sword was hailed as the strongest weapon in the 3,000 realm of the Great Path, and it had been stained with a great amount of blood. Divine Sword Qinghe. Emperor Nan had arrived. The Divine Sword Qinghe, which had once suppressed the gate of hell, had now appeared here. The blue divine light sprinkled down, and a figure descended with it, landing on the divine sword. Emperor Nan was dressed in a blue robe, elegant and free-spirited. Though he stood there quietly, he had suddenly become the center of attention. Above the sea of the path, all eyes were on him, and the expressions on many had changed. Just now, many people had died under the sword will of Emperor Nan. Emperor Nan. Gai Qiong looked at Emperor Nan. His eyes were a little cold. Are you going to intervene in the affairs of the Shangxiao Divine Palace today? Shangxiao Divine Palace is the preaching holy land of the upper heavens realm, as one of the principalities of the 3,000 realms of the Great Path, and should be protected from outside forces as such. What's more, the Shangxiao Divine Palace has been carrying out the will of the Great Emperor for many years, never involved itself in external disputes. Gai Qiong, as a cultivator under the Great Emperor, everything you did was all for your own benefit. Secondly, in the face of the changes happening in the original realm, Nantian Divine Kingdom is in alliance with the Shangxiao Divine Palace, and we will face all calamities together. If there is anyone who wants to destroy the Divine Palace, the Divine Sword Qinghe won't be picky. Whoever participated will die. Emperor Nan spoke, and his voice was calm and indifferent. It made the hearts of many who were around him tremble, especially those forces without influential leaders. Their hearts could not help but beat fast. If Emperor Nan were to destroy them, they would have no ability to resist. After today, if Emperor Nan did not perish, how many principalities could stop his sword? The expression on Gai Qiong and the others were not a good one. Emperor Nan was one of the few who stood at the pinnacle in the 3,000 realm of the Great Path. He was extremely powerful, and it would be difficult to keep him and kill him. Furthermore, Emperor Nan was not the palace lord of the Divine Palace. Although he has been calmly playing the role of a benevolent father all these years, no one would forget that the Qinghe Divine Sword was the strongest divine sword in the 3,000 realms of the Great Path. In the distance, inside the Divine Palace, the Palace Lord of the Divine Palace seemed to understand something when he heard Emperor Nan's words. He smiled. He didn't think that as the one who was involved, he had actually far less resolve than Emperor Nan. Perhaps this was what's considered no turning back. Under the current disadvantage, it was impossible to defeat the opponent. The only way to protect and preserve the Divine Palace was to go all out without any reserve. The Void Realm also belonged to the land of Divine Prefecture, so why should it be exempt? We have no great quarrel with Shangxiao Divine Palace. We heard that there are divine items passed down from the ancestral land. Can the Divine Palace give us a chance to take a look? To come here at a time like this was definitely trying to take advantage of the situation. However, if the Solar Divine Palace were to participate in the battle, it would add tremendous pressure to the Divine Palace. Without them, it would weaken the strength of their opponent considerably. However, despite the Solar Divine Palace's contrivance for the divine items of the ancestral land, the Divine Palace would clearly not oblige. It's not that magical, it's just a thing that assists in cultivation. There are many such treasures in the 3,000 realm of the Great Path. Since you are from the Solar Divine Mountain, you must have seen many such divine items better than these. The Palace Lord of the Divine Palace responded coldly. How about this? Di Wu, heir of the Solar Divine Palace, had always wanted to have an exchange with Yi Futian, so let's give them a chance. If Di Wu wins, the divine item from Shangxiao Divine Palace's ancestral land will be ceded to us. If Di Wu loses, we will leave, said the cultivator from the Solar Divine Mount. Their foremost target was the divine items. Many people frowned, and the cultivators from the Golden Divine Nation and the Holy Land of Taichu were a little displeased. But the Solar Divine Mountain was also a superpower in the land of the Divine Prefecture. No one understood that better than the Holy Land of Taichu and Gai Qiong from the Divine Prefecture. Therefore, the Solar Divine Mountain could not really care less, because they didn't want to join forces with the Golden Divine Nation in the first place. Their premier target here was the divine items. They were here to take advantage of the situation. Of course, to Di Wu, if he could defeat and kill Yi Futian, he would certainly not mind at all. The cultivators from the Holy Land of Taichu swept a look toward the other, and saw the War Emperor in purple looked indifferent. His disciple was defeated, and Mu Qingke also was defeated by Yi Futian. What confidence could the Solar Divine Mountain possibly have? To think that anyone from the Solar Divine Palace could defeat Yi Futian. When their thought turned to this, they didn't say anything more, and neither did the cultivators from the Golden Divine Nation. They stood quietly and didn't continue to fight. The atmosphere above the Divine Palace seemed a little suppressed. The Palace Lord of the Divine Palace hesitated. The cultivators from the Solar Divine Mountain was indeed a threat, and this game of chess was very unfair to them. If they lost, they had to hand over the divine items. But if they win, it would only be in exchange for the opponent to withdraw. But now the other party has the advantage. If they wanted to relieve some of the pressure, it seemed they had no choice but to agree. I have no objection. Yi Futian made a quick decision. He walked out very calmly as he levitated into the sky. His eyes were looking at a very faraway place, where vision could not traverse, only divine consciousness could. He was able to see all the cultivators of the Solar Divine Palace above the Sea of the Path, as well as Di Wu. Di Wu was also standing on a boat, but Yi Futian could feel that his temperament seemed to have changed a little. Bathed in the sacred divine flames, he seemed more natural, shining brilliantly, as if he was shielded in a flaming glossy armor. Presumably, he must also have had experienced some miraculous changes. Otherwise, Yi Futian had every reason to believe that with his own brilliant battle records, how could Di Wu have the confidence in dealing with him? It was rumored that the Solar Divine Palace had influences in the Divine Prefecture of the upper worlds. It must be that which had transformed Di Wu. Where are we fighting? Yi Futian asked loudly. Above the Heavenly Mandate Academy. The cultivator from the Solar Divine Mountain responded. We need to guard around the battlefield, said the palace lord. He was worried about the others. Yi Futian was of great significance to them, and nothing could happen to him. If Yi Futian perished, the alliance would fall apart in an instant. The Heavenly Mandate realm would be the first one to sink into complete chaos. At which time, everything would no longer exist but would be replaced. Sure, I trust the Divine Palace and Emperor Nan. The cultivator from the Solar Divine Palace said with a smile, appearing extremely benevolent. When his voice faded, a fiery red boat headed forward on the sea of the path. Di Wu, who was bathed in the divine light of flame, flashed and then leaped up and turned into a golden lightning bolt, heading straight toward Yi Futian. With the Solar Divine Mountain at his back, Di Wu seemed to be even more confident and fearless. He leaped up from the sea of the path and walked directly toward the Divine Palace. The cultivators from the Solar Divine Mountain followed along, guarding him. High above the sky, the war god in purple looked at all this with nonchalance, and he didn't bother to stop the others. Likewise, Yi Futian also moved forward, with Taishan Palace and the Palace Lord of the Divine Palace guarding on each side, separated by a certain distance. Although this duel was only with Di Wu, the War Emperor in purple, and the Holy Land of Taichu were there, watching with cultivators from all sides. They couldn't afford to be careless. Now that Emperor Nan has entered deep into the other side, although no one dared to act rashly, he still couldn't let his guard down. In any case, Yi Futian could not fail. Soon, the two figures stood across each other in the air. Di Wu stood opposite Yi Futian, and two dominant auras were released at the same time, moving toward each other with oppressive force. Traces of the sun's divine brilliance sprinkled down and aimed at Yi Futian. Each ray of the sun's divine brilliance contained extremely terrifying power, to scorch as if about to ignite the void. Yi Futian waved with his hand, and in an instant, the heaven and the earth gave birth to an infinite sword will. Its bleakness shrouded the boundless void, enveloping the battlefield where the two were at. Buzz! A bleak sword will rolled toward Di Wu, revealing an extremely strong murderous intent. It was desperate and cold, just like Yi Futian's mood currently. However, at the same time, a terrifying solar divine light bloomed from Di Wu. This divine light was able to burn up the attack by the Great Path, so that the sharp swords made by the swordsmanship were incinerated into nothingness and disappeared. It seemed that the attack of his swordsmanship could never get close to the opponent. Di Wu looked at Yi Futian. Above him, the flame of the way turned into an armor of divine fire, shining brightly. The space around him seemed to be on fire with it, and the sky seemed to be steamed dry by the flames from his body. He cast a glance at Yi Futian. He, who had experienced transformation, was no longer the same as who he was before. He used to be extremely confident in his own ability, but as Yi Futian became stronger and stronger, and his name rang throughout the 9 realms, Di Wu realized that he was no match to Yi Futian. However, this time, he was extremely confident. He wanted to fight Yi Futian, because he had been transformed by the Great Path. Now his way had been transformed into something divine. Stepping forward, Di Wu walked toward Yi Futian. Above him, the solar divine light turned into the way, directly shot out. Wherever the light passed, everything turned into nothingness. It dissipated under the solar divine light. Even the swords were consumed by it. His way had already surpassed the ordinary way and transformed into an extraordinary power of the Great Path. The solar divine light released from him was enough to obliterate all existence. Ordinary Ren Huang would be incinerated right away. The cultivators around could feel what they saw. Today, all those present, whether inside or outside of the Divine Palace, were extremely powerful, and they all had a keen perception of the power of the Great Path. Di Wu was very strong. This was no longer the Great Path of Flames. No wonder the cultivators from the Solar Divine Palace asked Di Wu to fight Yi Futian, in order to seize the divine items from the ancestral land. Solar divine light shot directly at Yi Futian, and the crowd saw that Yi Futian was covered entirely by the divine light. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The divine light of the sun shone down on Yi Futian, flooding the space where he was. However, beams of golden divine light shot out. The trumpeting of elephants filled the air. In the divine light of the sun, Yi Futian's body was enveloped by a towering golden divine elephant that appeared to be the king of divine elephants. The divine light of the sun shone down on Yi Futian, flooding the space where he was. However, beams of golden divine light shot out. The trumpeting of elephants filled the air. In the divine light of the sun, Yi Futian's body was enveloped by a towering golden divine elephant that appeared to be the king of divine elephants. Frightening divine fire of the sun shot down on the divine elephant. It could not immediately melt the divine elephant. However, it still caused the figure of the divine elephant to turn liquid gold and faintly show signs of melting. One could imagine how terrifying the divine light of the sun was. Diwu's eyes were extremely frightening. They were like the divine eyes of the sun. Roars sounded from behind him. A scorching sun appeared. Golden divine fire burned around the sun, melting the air into nothingness and forming streaks of flames. Both inside and outside of the divine palace, all of the cultivators felt the frightening scorching winds. Under the divine light, many buildings of the divine palace below immediately began to burst into flames. Beneath the light of the flawless divine wheel of the sun, the divine light of the sun that shot out continued to melt the figure of the divine elephant, wanting to bury Yi Futian inside and directly burn him to ashes. Yi Futian raised his head and looked at Diwu. From within the golden sun, illusions of golden ravens appeared. They soared around in the sun. The divine fire of the sun that enveloped Yi Futian's body also became a divine sun bird, the three-legged golden raven. The gigantic three-legged golden raven spread its wings. Its talons clawed at the divine elephant and actually ripped it apart bit by bit. Its talons were aiming to pierce through the divine elephant to crush Yi Futian's divine wheel of the great path. Yi Futian raised his hand and extended his arm forward, sending out a punch. The trumpeting of the elephant resounded in the sky. It was the great path of destruction. The trumpeting of the divine elephant lingered, while its power shattered the sky and directly hit the three-legged golden raven. The golden raven was crushed into pieces. However, at the same time, golden ravens flew out from the divine wheel of the sun that was behind Diwu. The golden ravens covered the sky and attacked Yi Futian all at once. Yi Futian shifted his will. Endless sword will reverberated in the space. The sword will seemed to be resonating with the sky. Yi Futian pointed out a finger. The unceasing sword will all gathered at his fingertip. Billions of divine swords came together as a single divine sword coalesced at Yi Futian's fingertip. The terrifying, flowing sword will ground all the incoming divine light of the sun into dust. Buzz. Yi Futian moved his body. He actually ignored his opponent's ferocious attack and pounced at Diwu with the speed of lightning. His finger pointed forward, and the divine sword moved before him, slashing everything in his path into pieces. A gigantic golden raven leaped toward Yi Futian. However, the raven was pierced by the divine sword. Moreover, there was also the terrifying great path of destruction by the divine elephant protecting Yi Futian. A sharp shriek was heard. The crowd witnessed the divine sun birds being torn apart one by one. They transformed into flames of the way and plummeted from the sky. However, as Yi Futian approached Diwu, he could clearly sense the heightening temperature of the flames. Diwu's eyes were frightening. He stared at Yi Futian, who was approaching him. His gaze, which was permeated with murderous intent, did not waver even for a bit. Yi Futian had been crowned the strongest cultivator of this generation in the 9 realms. His ability was without question. Diwu was well aware of this fact. If Yi Futian could be defeated easily, Diwu would not have such a strong urge to fight him now. Diwu extended both his arms sideways. The divine light of the sun shone more brilliantly. His eyes were even scarier than before. Suddenly, an unparalleled divine light of the sun shot through the great path, aiming straight ahead at Yi Futian while ignoring all his defenses. Swoosh, swoosh. The majestic illusion of the divine elephant was punctured. Diwu's attack was a bona fide great path of destruction, causing the golden divine elephant to burn under the intense flame of the way. The cultivators, who were observing the battle, felt slightly emotional. The cultivators of Sun God Mountain were the descendants of the Sun God. The bloodline of Sun God coursed in their veins. Even though countless years had passed and Sun God had become nothing but a legend now, the divine power inherited by the descendants of Sun God Mountain was still very formidable. If other ordinary Renhuangs were exposed to this divine light of the sun, they would be killed instantly by it, without any means of defending themselves. Moreover, Diwu's attack was a mass-killing technique with frightening power. No matter how many opponents there were, they would be burned to dust under the divine light of the sun. One could only imagine how scary this power was. Even flawless divine will possessors would die horribly if their defenses were weak. Both of them were extremely quick. As Yi Futian advanced, he had already appeared in the spatial world enveloped by the divine wheel of the sun. It was as though there was a sun in front of him, and everything he did was futile. However, the divine swords covered the sky. Yi Futian's finger still pointed forward at the sun before him. A sword/mark appeared. The divine swords charged forward like moths dashing toward a fire. Even the divine light of the sun could not melt or destroy them. The swords kept advancing and could not be stopped. Rumble. The golden raven seemed to walk out from the sun and cover Diwu's figure. Currently, Diwu was directly inside the divine sun bird. Under the light of the divine wheel of the sun, it was as though they were within a sun. Diwu raised his hand forward, and the talons of the golden raven ripped the space apart, clawing straight toward the divine swords. Swoosh, swoosh. The swords directly pierced through the talons of the golden raven. However, at the same time, the divine swords were branded red and melted little by little. Their offensive power immediately became far weaker than before. In the end, the divine swords pierced through the figure of the golden raven, but appeared as though they had pierced into the divine fire of the sun. All the divine swords were turned into a molten state. Diwu's eyes were staring straight at Yi Futian. Yi Futian actually dared to get so close to him? Currently, the divine light of the sun protected his body. No one could approach Diwu. Yi Futian was rushing to his death. At the moment, the bloodline of Sun God seemed to be awakening in Diwu's body. It was burning. The golden divine flame was refining everything it touched. Under the divine light of the sun, Yi Futian's divine elephant divine wheel was melting bit by bit. It seems like this Diwu has awakened his bloodline. Cultivators from the direct line of Sun God Mountain can gradually strengthen their way after they have awakened and refined their bloodline many times. Shen Gao from Shen Clan explained. Sun God Mountain calls the final form divine body of the sun. Sun God Mountain has trained many outstanding juniors, but many years have passed, and there has yet to be a junior with the divine body of the sun. Diwu is currently only on his journey of awakening, yet he is already so powerful and can suppress another flawless divine will possessor who is at the same level as him. Shen Gao had trained in the divine prefecture. Naturally, he knew more than the rest. In the divine prefecture, there were also quite a few ancient clans who crowned themselves as the descendants of the gods. However, after the end of the gods, there were not many gods left. Those who could really be classified as gods were scarce. Having a divine body implied that Diwu was qualified to become an existence of that level. It was easier said than done. Those ancient forces were all cultivating juniors who had the potential to reach that level. Diwu seemed to have also been chosen. Could he defeat Yi Futian? Just as he was speaking, Shen Gao revealed a strange look. Where did both of them go? Diwu's silhouette had actually disappeared. So had Yi Futian's. There seemed to be lingering while surging in the space. However, their two figures had completely disappeared. Diwu's figure was caught by the cultivators of the Solar Divine Palace. His divine wheel was severely damaged. A beam of sword will penetrated straight through his body, causing Diwu's entire aura to be extremely weak. This sword nearly killed him. Diwu's figure was caught by the cultivators of the Solar Divine Palace. His divine wheel was severely damaged. A beam of sword will penetrated straight through his body, causing Diwu's entire aura to be extremely weak. This sword nearly killed him. Diwu was also in agony internally. His divine will had undergone a metamorphosis, and his path had grown more powerful. The cultivators from the divine prefecture's Sun God Mountain had told him that he had a chance to refine his bloodline until he could unleash his maximum potential. He might even have a chance to cultivate the divine body of the sun. The improvement of his ability made him extremely self-confident and made him want to battle it out with Yi Futian. However, the battle had ended so pathetically. With his divine wheel of the great path being suppressed, Diwu could not block the sword. This was a huge blow to Diwu. Back in the god's relic, Diwu was one of the most monstrous figures in the 9 realms. He had forged a flawless divine wheel in the god's relic. At that time, Yi Futian was the same level as he was. Back then, as the god of Solar Divine Palace, Diwu did not even consider Yi Futian to be a threat. However, afterward, Yi Futian became more and more famous. Hence, today, Diwu found it very difficult to accept this humiliating defeat. Sun God Mountain also placed their wager on him. Since they had announced it in public, they could not go back on their word. Although the cultivators of Sun God Mountain had come over to pillage and take advantage of other people's misfortune, they were still people of status and had to admit their defeat. The cultivators of Sun God Mountain glanced at Diwu and then looked towards Yi Futian. He was truly extraordinary. They had already tested Diwu's ability. However, they had not imagined that he would still lose to Yi Futian. It looked like Solar Divine Palace was fated to not be able to obtain the divine item in the ancestral lands of the Divine Palace. After this, they could only be observers and witness what happened after. "You may see yourselves out," the Palace Lord said while sweeping a glance at the cultivators of Sun God Mountain. The leading cultivator smiled and said, "Since we have been defeated, Solar Divine Palace will not participate in today's battle. We will take our leave now." After he spoke, he turned around and left, keeping his promise. The cultivators of Solar Divine Palace also left one after another, but they bore grudges in their hearts. However, they didn't leave entirely. Instead, they lingered at the Sea of the Path, which was quite a distance away from the Divine Palace. They stood at the Sea of the Path and unleashed their wills in the direction of the Divine Palace. They could still observe the battle in such a manner. They wanted to witness for themselves how this storm would end. Could Shangxiao Divine Palace escape their plight? If Shangxiao Divine Palace were defeated, the Divine Martial Road in their ancestral lands would be plundered clean. When that happened, cultivators of Sun God Mountain would no longer be bound to an agreement. There was still hope of getting some spoils. After the cultivators of Sun God Mountain left, the atmosphere of the Divine Palace still remained tense. "I have a condition. Would you be willing to hear me out?" Shen Gao, a cultivator from the Shen clan, spoke at this moment. Everyone's gazes immediately turned towards him. Yi Futian similarly looked towards Shen Gao. Shen Gao's figure walked out from the Sea of the Path, and he ascended into the air. Across the distance, his gaze was directed at Yi Futian as he said, "Yi Futian has previously attacked my Shen clan. Now, he has stirred up trouble in the higher heavens realm. As long as the Divine Palace hands him over to me, I will not be involved in matters here. I will bring him back to be dealt with. How about it?" The Divine Palace wanted Yi Futian. Their conflict was also due to Yi Futian. Shen Gao was actually also thinking that if they could capture Yi Futian, they could still have an opportunity to bring him to their side. Even if he had to make enemies of both parties, Shen Gao still looked highly on Yi Futian. If Shen Gao truly had to kill Yi Futian, he would feel that it was a waste. "It looks like Shen clan has not learned your lesson from the besiegement of the Heavenly Mandate Academy last time," Lord Taixian warned loudly, as he stared at Shen Gao from a distance. "If that's the case, Shen clan better pray that you can capture all of us in one go. Otherwise, we might not let Shen clan off the hook so easily this time." It was clearly impossible for the Divine Palace to hand Yi Futian over to the Shen clan. Currently, among the forces of 9 realms, everyone knew Yi Futian was the strongest. Shen Gao was also well aware of it. Hence, he only smiled when he heard Lord Taishuan's reply. He didn't take Lord Taishuan's response to heart. Clearly, he had predicted it. Times have changed. Shingao said with a smile. Now the passageway that connected the divine prefecture and the void realm had been opened. Not only had Shingao returned, but the Shim clan in the void realm could also get in contact with the Shim clan of the divine prefecture. Besieging the Shim clan? Even though the Heavenly Mandate Academy had an alliance of forces, they would have to think twice in order to take it down. Have you all made your choice? The palace lord's gaze swept across to Guide Song, who was standing next to the throne. Under such circumstances, how did he plan to fight? If they began to fight, could he bear the cost? Since we are rebuilding from scratch, why do we need to hesitate so much? At that moment, a voice called out from the sky. Once the voice cried out, a terrifying wave of the great path swept out. It slammed towards the divine palace. Huge rumbles could be heard. Everyone's gazes swept towards the cultivator who had sent out the attack. It was Purple Robe War Emperor of the Holy Land of Taichu. Some local forces of the Nine Realms still had some reservations about starting a fight. However, the Purple Robe War Emperor of the Holy Land of Taichu had purposely come from the divine prefecture to settle this affair. His first group of people had failed the task previously. Now that he had personally come over, it was impossible for him to tolerate failure. As for what would happen in this battle, or what consequences it would bring about, Purple Robe War Emperor did not care. It was sufficient as long as Golden Divine Nation kept their promise. The Holy Land of Taichu would replace Shangxiao Divine Palace to teach the way in the training Holy Land of the higher heavens realms. This time, the might of his attack was more terrifying than before. An unparalleled aura gushed into the divine palace. Instantly, cracks actually appeared all over this ancient palace, which was erected on the island in the middle of the Sea of the Path. The cracks were propagating quickly. Rumble. Intense and terrifying sounds could still be heard. The entire island of the divine palace sank even further. Many defense matrices were activated. However, they were immediately destroyed. An existence of this level was already beyond what the matrices of the divine palace could withstand against. Besides the divine palace, no one in the entire 3,000 realms of the Great Path could establish a super matrix that could withstand a figure of such level. The divine palace was about to fall. As they witnessed this scene, some cultivators were stunned and drew in deep breaths. They then realized what was about to happen. This outcome was only natural. It was impossible for a building like the divine palace to be able to withstand the shock from today's intense battle. The cultivators who invaded the divine palace today, especially this top figure from the Holy Land of Taichu, ignored the authority of Golden Divine Nation and attacked the divine palace right away. Would they still care about the collapse of the divine palace? In this distance, at the Sea of the Path, numerous cultivators were following the updates of what was happening here through their wills. Many of them had trained in the divine palace before. The scenes that played out in their minds caused them to be speechless. They felt dejected. Who would have thought that the Holy Land, which once stood high in the higher heavens realm, would sink in such a manner? The cultivators of the divine palace stared at the scene silently, yet their aura was intensifying. The divine palace was collapsing. The grand matrix which served as the foundation of the palace had been destroyed. The entire palace was sinking into the sea. The palace lord glanced at what was happening beneath him with a complicated look. He raised his head and stared at the Purple Robe War Emperor. An unparalleled might of the way suddenly enveloped the entire divine palace. The ruins of the palace were surrounded by a dazzling divine light, joining together as one. The ruins floated in space and did not continue to sink. Is it worth it? The Purple Robe War Emperor traversed across the sky. Golden ripples spread throughout the sky and spiraled downwards. With a huge rumble, the divine palace continued to sink. Every step that he took was like a terrifying wave, causing the divine palace to continue fragmenting while sinking. The palace lord could not stop the palace from being destroyed. In the end, the palace lord decided to let go. With a shift of his will, the divine palace sank into the Sea of the Path. Purple Robe War Emperor raised his arm and glanced at the palace lord and the other cultivators. He sent out a punch. This punch penetrated the space. The true will of waves of a war god unleashed by him was absolutely terrifying. A choking might enveloped the cultivators of the divine palace. It was impossible for the palace lord to protect everyone. At that moment, there suddenly appeared a peerless divine light that flew over in their direction. It directly flew out and blocked the punch coming their way. Rumble! The peerless punch collided with the object, sweeping up gales and huge waves. The punch that could directly shatter the divine palace could not destroy the object that had appeared. It was a tablet. No one was in control of it. It was as though the tablet was flying on its own. On the tablet, endless divine runes of the great path were carved on it. Even the war god's true will of waves could not shatter this tablet. Even more frightening was that, after this tablet descended, it kept expanding and became a huge heavenly tablet. Had another giant figure of the divine palace attacked? The various cultivators thought to themselves. Outside of the ruins, all the gazes of the people on the sea of the path were directed towards the battlefield. Many of them had heard that the divine palace most likely had more than one mighty existence at the peak of the realm aside from the palace lord. The giant figures especially seemed to know something about it. However, no silhouette had appeared. Instead, the tablet that was floating in the sky released an even more brilliant and eye-catching light. It seemed to be an object without a master. The top figures were staring at the tablet. They revealed fearful looks. This was no mere tablet. They sensed a unique aura from it. At that moment, a sigh came from the tablet. It was the tablet sighing. Futian revealed a strange expression. The eyes of Gai Qiong, Shen Gao, and the other top figures of the last generation were all staring at the tablet. Previously, there were rumors that the existence back then had not died and was cultivating in the divine palace. The eyes of Gai Qiong, Shen Gao, and the other top figures of the last generation were all staring at the tablet. Previously, there were rumors that the existence back then had not died and was cultivating in the divine palace. Was this tablet activated by him? Is that the old palace lord? Guide Song was frowning as he also stared in that direction. It didn't seem right. It was not the old palace lord of the divine palace. Emperor Song? Guide Song exclaimed as he suddenly thought of someone when he sensed the aura. It was a figure who shared his name. The person was a peak figure back during the Age of Turmoil. However, Emperor Song of the divine palace was not his name. He was called this due to his powerful technique. Back in the day, Emperor Song's cultivation was peerless. He was the most talented figure in the divine palace. He was even more powerful than the divine palace lord of the day. He had forged a flawless divine wheel of the great path, and an upper-level flawless divine wheel at that. An existence of such a level would be a peerless figure, even in the entire divine prefecture. However, by right, he should have fallen before having cultivated to the peak. Why was it that they all felt that their assumptions were wrong? Back then, the person who lived was Emperor Song and not the old palace lord? Gai Qiong said as he also revealed a strange look. These were all matters from long ago. The old palace lord and Emperor Song had both suffered severe injuries. It was said that Emperor Song had died while the old palace lord had been seriously wounded. Yet, right now their assumptions seemed to have been wrong. I never imagined that there would be people who still remembered me, a voice said from the tablet. Then the gigantic, endless tablet flew up into the sky and expanded rapidly. It blocked out the sky and the sun, enveloping this entire region of the sea of the path. The various cultivators raised their heads and saw an unparalleled divine tablet. On it, endless inscriptions were carved. It radiated with brilliant light, and they could faintly see a silhouette appear in the tablet. It was the silhouette of a middle-aged man. He wore a long white robe. His figure seemed to have merged with the tablet. From the tablet, endless light shone down. Huge rumbles could be heard. Everyone sensed a heavenly might. The heavens seemed to have changed hue and were enveloped by the tablet. Rumble. A huge rumbling sound could be heard. It was as though the sky was falling, and the earth was about to split apart. A god hand appeared and immediately covered the sky, suppressing this region of the sea of the path. Everything was beneath the god hand. Be careful, someone said. The various cultivators had exceptionally serious looks in their eyes. They all sensed a powerful pressure. The great path in this area seemed to have been suppressed by the god hand. The power of the Great Path could not circulate successfully. From this, it could be seen how frightening the might of the God Hand was. Boom, boom, boom. The palm print had yet to come down when its divine might of the Great Path descended. Some people who did not have strong enough cultivation were directly sent crashing into the sea of the path. They revealed looks of extreme pain. On the sea of the path, waves churned. Everyone was pressured to the point that they found it hard to breathe. Yi Futian and the others stood there watching. The power was naturally not aimed at them. However, they still could sense the astonishing suppressive force. It was as though that palm had suppressed the entire world. Right then, a silhouette rose up to receive the palm print of the Great Path. Similarly, a loud resonating sound that filled the heavens could be heard. An unparalleled war god's true will of waves shot up into the sky and collided with the God Hand pressing down on them. The dull sound caused the hearts of everyone around to tremble. Purple Robe War Emperor alone rose into the air. He arrived beneath the God Hand. As he stood there, he seemed exceptionally minuscule compared to the hand. Yet he directly raised his arm and punched out towards the God Hand. The God Hand collided with his punch. A dull thud could be heard. Wave after wave of his war god's true will of waves swept towards the God Hand with his fist as the center. In an instant, tens of thousands of vibrations erupted. Rumble. There was a huge sound, and the God Hand collapsed. The terrifying punch was also shattered. Purple Robe War Emperor's figure plummeted downwards. At the same time, there were explosions in the sea of the path below, and sea water splashed up. The scene was very frightening. From the tablet, endless divine light shone down. Countless large handprints actually flew out from it. Each handprint had frightening power. They directly slaughtered their way in the direction where the army was in the sea of the path. Gaiqiong's figure also moved. He took a step forward, and the heavenly might of the Great Path burst forth from him. The endless space seemed to be completely enveloped within his will. A golden divine spear appeared in his hand and pierced into the space. The giant handprints in the space were immediately shattered into dust. Purple Robe War Emperor's forceful attack had already ruined everything. Now they had no choice but to battle it out. The tablet spun in the heavens above. Endless divine light shot out from it. Each beam of divine light contained a large handprint. Their destructive power was astonishing. Everyone attack, Gaitsong said in a loud voice. In the current situation, Gaitsong's side still held the advantage. They could only do their best to prevent these people from escaping. Gaitsong wielded his divine spear and charged forwards after he spoke. However, Lord Taixian appeared before him, wielding a divine sword. The heavens were filled with the endless sound of gyukins of the Great Path. All of you retreat. The divine palace lord ordered the various cultivators beside him. Cultivators of the lower plains could not participate in a battle of such a high level. On the contrary, they would likely be killed if the opportunity arose. Since they had reached this point, there was no turning back. The dazzling divine mountain enveloped all the cultivators inside of it. Then, the divine palace lord sent out a palm strike, and the entire divine mountain immediately flew off into the distance. It traveled a huge distance in an instant. Shinji, go and cut them off, Shingao said. Shinji then stepped forward, the light of the Great Path of space shining off him. Swoosh, swoosh. Green divine light was everywhere, turning everything to dust. The formless will of the Great Path of space was also turned to dust. Being enveloped by the green divine light, Shinji discovered that he actually could not teleport away from where he was. Shingao swept a glance towards Emperor Nan when he saw this scene. He then said, "Today, I will experience the ability of Emperor Nan myself." After he said this, he unleashed the Tianshan Divine Halo, which could suppress all the power of the Great Path. Tianshan Divine Halo collided with the green divine light. The two lights countered each other. A terrifying storm of Tianshan cleave enveloped this part of the sky. Shingao stood in front of Emperor Nan while the gold and green lights continued to clash. Scary-looking cracks appeared in their surroundings. One could imagine how frightening their auras were. Buzz! A green gale swept across the space. The gale was everywhere, trapping both Shingao and Shinji in the region of the gale. At that moment, another top figure unleashed his attack. This person had been exceptionally quiet all this while. However, as soon as he made a move, countless weapons appeared in the sky and flew in the direction of the Divine Palace Lord. This person was a top figure from Mo clan, one of the ancient clans in the Divine Prefecture. Mo clan wanted to establish its influence in the original realm. The clan had decided to collaborate with Golden Divine Nation and the Holy Land of Taichu. This was because it was hard for the clan to dominate a realm, since there were too many forces entering the original realm after the passageway had been opened. After all, Mo clan had no foundations here. Under such circumstances, it was more suitable for them to form an alliance with a local force, and then slowly exert their influence in the original realm. Since everyone had decided to go all out in this battle, it would be the wisest to destroy the Divine Palace completely to avoid any future trouble. At least a few top figures would have to join the battle in order to kill everyone from the Divine Palace. In an instant, the person from Mo clan clashed with the Divine Palace Lord. Even after the cultivators of Solar Divine Palace had left, their side still had more cultivators as compared to the Divine Palace. Clearly, they still held the advantage. Unbeknownst of whether or not it was intentional, nobody targeted the cultivators who retreated before the battle erupted. The cultivators avoided the battles of the top figures and headed in the direction where Futian and his group left. They were not qualified to join the battles of the top figures. After all, there was a stark difference in their abilities. Their targets were the other cultivators. Moreover, Futian had to be hunted down. The army formed by various forces moved enthusiastically and rushed towards the Sea of the Path. They were pursuing the cultivators who were ordered to retreat by the Divine Palace Lord. Futian's group was actually quite strong too. Even though some top figures could not make their way over here, they had sent many cultivators over to aid Futian. Futian's group moved at high speeds. They shifted in space and traversed across the sky without pausing. The cultivators who were hunting them followed behind them. The distance between the two groups was shortening. Futian looked into the distance. There was a lone boat floating on the vast Sea of the Path. A figure wearing a straw hat was standing on the boat. Beside him was a demonic beast, a demonic rat. A glint of cold light flashed in the eyes of Futian when he saw the boat. This was his last hope. If any top figures came over from the Divine Palace battlefield to hunt them, and Futian could not defend against them, all his efforts prior to this would be in vain. One group should leave first. Senior Kuempeng, may I trouble you to lead these people away from here? Futian asked Demon Emperor Kuempeng. His speed was very fast, and he could lead those with weak cultivation away from here. There was no real meaning for them to participate in this battle. After all, even Futian himself could not predict what would happen later on. After the Shao clan and Dou tribe were held back, the cultivators that they had on their side was clearly at a disadvantage. All right, Kuempeng replied as he nodded his head. He did not reject Futian's request and led some people away. Futian and the others continued to advance. They only stopped when they were near the lone boat. Very soon, the people behind them also caught up with them. They were the members of the various allied forces. They looked towards Futian's group, who had stopped. They then looked towards the lone boat floating on the Sea of the Path below. Some people frowned. They actually could not sense the person's aura. It was possible that the other party had very weak cultivation, or he could also be very powerful. However, this was deep within the Sea of the Path. How could someone who was very weak end up here? This caused some people to feel uneasy. Could it be that Futian still had a trump card? Right at this moment, the figure with the straw hat, who stood at the fore, raised his head and looked at the crowd. He had a pair of terrifying eyes. The pair of dark, demonic eyes were emotionless and cold. His gaze was like the gaze of a grim reaper. Retreat! The cultivators from Shun clan came to their senses. It was him. He had disappeared since the battle a few years ago. Nobody had expected that he would actually appear in the Sea of the Path today, during this crucial battle. It turned out that the figure on the lone boat was none other than Sky River Great Elder. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., Please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Sky River Great Elder had committed a massacre in Shin Clan before. Many cultivators of Shin Clan had fallen to him. Even the Great Elder, Shinji, was injured by Sky River Great Elder before the leader of Shin Clan could wound him and force him to retreat. Sky River Great Elder had not appeared since the battle when the Heavenly Mandate Academy led their army to confront Shin Clan. Sky River Great Elder had committed a massacre in Shin Clan before. Many cultivators of Shin Clan had fallen to him. Even the Great Elder, Shinji, was injured by Sky River Great Elder before the leader of Shin Clan could wound him and force him to retreat. Sky River Great Elder had not appeared since the battle when the Heavenly Mandate Academy led their army to confront Shin Clan. Some said that Sky River Great Elder had fallen into the demonic way and had most likely destroyed himself. Some said that he had gone crazy and was missing. However, at this very moment, he silently appeared in the Sea of the Path. He calmly sat on the lone boat in the middle of the sea. If their current location was not the Sea of the Path, strangers would really treat Sky River Great Elder as an ordinary man. Sky River Great Elder had broken through the plain in the past. When cultivators of Shin Clan saw him, their first instinct was to run away from him. At the moment, the giant figures had yet to come over here. When facing a cultivator at the level of Sky River Great Elder, there was no point in having a large number of people. They could not possibly defeat him. If they were to engage in a battle with him, they would suffer great losses. It's Sky River Great Elder. The cultivators of Golden Divine Nation and the other forces also managed to react to all this. They frantically retreated and prepared to escape from this place. A terrifying crimson light shot out from Sky River Great Elder's eyes. Even though he was merely standing there quietly, the vast space was instantly enveloped by a horrifying aura. Endless crimson demonic light filled the heavens and earth, as though there were streaks of crimson lightning flashing in the sky. Boom! Sky River Great Elder took a step forward and directly walked into the crowd of cultivators. The will of the crowd burst forth, and their figures retreated hastily. However, streaks of crimson lightning shot out like blood-red swords. The bodies of many cultivators with weaker cultivation were directly penetrated by the crimson lightning, and they were locked in place in mid-air. Among these people, most of them were cultivators of Shin Clan. They faced the most tragic fate. Obviously, even though Sky River Great Elder had slaughtered his way into Shin Clan before, he had not forgotten his vengeance in the past up until now. He had never forgotten about the death of his daughter, his 3,000 disciples, and other members of Sky River Temple. This vengeance could only be abetted by the fresh blood of Shin Clan members. After the battle at Shin Clan, he left and gradually gained control over the demonic item. However, he still did not go to meet his wife, Shin Wuxia. It was not because he didn't miss her, but rather because he was remorseful. He felt guilty towards Shin Wuxia. He was ashamed to meet her both in the past and now. In the past, he had not been able to protect Shin Wuxia and their daughter Nongyue. Their daughter was killed, and Shin Wuxia was imprisoned by Shin Clan for many years. However, he was not able to do anything, and could only quietly train alone. He swallowed his pride and endured the suffering. He did not dare to reveal even a slight hint of his ambition. He had failed too many people. On this day, he intended to kill members of Shin Clan and commit a massacre within the clan. As long as he was still alive, his biggest goal would be eradicating Shin Clan until not one of them was left. He could not let go of this hatred. However, he was well aware that his wife, Shin Wuxia, originated from Shin Clan. Even though she had cut ties with the clan and did not have any feelings for the clan now, it was something that could not be changed. The bloodline of Shin Clan members also coursed in Shin Wuxia's veins. They shared the same origins. Under such circumstances, if he asked Shin Wuxia to kill the members of the Shin Clan, could she really do so? He had decided to eradicate Shin Clan and eliminate the clansmen of his wife. There was no way he could face his wife, not now nor in the past. In the current age of turmoil, when Heavenly Mandate Academy and Yi Futian faced a huge crisis, only then had he appeared and found Yi Futian. Not many people knew about this. Shin Wuxia also did not know about his appearance. Yi Futian merely left a demonic rat by his side to serve as a means of communication. The demonic rat was naturally from the Purple Gold Rat clan and was under his control. It was trembling at this moment. Rumble! The endless crimson lightning drawn from the heavens above actually became a frightening crimson divine furnace. Miserable screams could be heard. The cultivators that had been pierced through by the crimson lightning were all smelted. It was extremely wretched. Sky River Great Elder, a cultivator of Shin Clan, roared. A frightening golden divine halo was unleashed from his body. Extremely brilliant golden lightning directly cleaved the space. It was the Tianshan cleave technique. Yet, a terrifying crimson glow directly attacked the golden halo that cleaved the space and caused it to explode into fragments. Sky River Great Elder stepped forward and extended his palm across the space. He recognized many of the senior members of Shin Clan. After all, he was previously a son-in-law of Shin Clan and had spent some time living and training in Shin Clan. He was familiar with many of the seniors. Nevertheless, now they were mortal enemies. He would not stop until they were all dead. Sky River Great Elder extended his palm towards the cultivator of Shin Clan and suddenly clenched it. A loud scream could be heard. The face of the cultivator was contorted, and he was in extreme pain. The crimson demonic light pierced to his figure. Then his figure immediately exploded into pieces, and his soul dissipated. The members of the other forces instantly escaped in all directions. When faced with a cultivator whose plane surpassed their own, even if they might be able to put up a fight if they joined forces, the first person who attacked would surely die first. Under such circumstances, everyone wanted to preserve their own life first and ensure their own survival. Buzz! Sky River Great Elder's silhouette became a frightening bolt of crimson lightning. Above the sea of the path, fresh blood constantly rained down on the world below. Many people perished in the sky above the sea of the path. They would be forever buried here. Yi Futian and the others were also slightly astonished when they saw the scene. Aside from Yi Futian, the people here seemed to have not known that Sky River Great Elder was here. From the looks of it, Yi Futian had intentionally arranged for this. This way, even if they had been chased by figures at the peak, they still had cultivators who could keep one or two of them in check. Of course, if the disparity was too great, even if Sky River Great Elder killed off a few powerful existences, the situation would still not change. They could only submit to their fates then. Aside from that, Sky River Great Elder's methods were too dominant. They could even be considered cruel. He did not seem like a famous sage who once taught the way in the Tianhe realm. Instead, he seemed like a bona fide demonic figure. However, when the crowd thought of everything that Sky River Great Elder had been through, they could empathize with him. He had practiced forbearance for many years. Sky River Great Elder had demonstrated very high endurance by not going insane after suffering for so long. Otherwise, he would not have lasted until this day. Now, him descending into the demonic way was also due to what Shun clan did back then. Shun clan had previously acted too harshly. They had initiated a war to destroy a realm, and had killed countless cultivators of the Tianhe realm. No one could have done better if they were in Sky River Great Elder's position. Everything that Shun clan was facing now was a matter of cause and effect. If they had not been so cruel, they would not have forced Sky River Great Elder to become what he was today. Yi Futian was also looking at the battle. Grandmaster had indeed joined the demonic way. He acquired a demonic divine item. It was not easy for him to gain control of the demonic power contained within the item. Yi Futian had no idea about the whereabouts of his grandmaster for these past few years. He had never visited the Heavenly Mandate Academy before. Yi Futian speculated that his grandmaster had been living in agony. After all, Grandmaster refrained himself from visiting the Heavenly Mandate Academy, even after his wife had joined the academy for training. Grandmaster had shunned them up until now. He finally appeared when Yi Futian was facing a crisis. Although Grandmaster was a demon when he was facing Shun clan and all the other enemies, Yi Futian could not find fault with the way Grandmaster treated him. Yi Futian felt so even though he felt like he had never understood Grandmaster before. He hadn't even gotten to know Grandmaster properly. When Yi Futian was training in the Tianhe realm, most likely, Grandmaster was also living in hatred during that period of time. Right at this moment, a terrifying aura drew near. Frowning, Yi Futian and his group looked up in the direction where the aura came from. A figure dressed in white robes rushed towards here. It was none other than the cultivator from the Holy Land of Taichu, who led his group to challenge the Heavenly Mandate Academy before this. This cultivator was also a giant figure. Even though he was not as powerful as the Purple Robe War Emperor, who came from the lower worlds, he was also a top figure in the Holy Land of Taichu. This cultivator had been waiting for his chance. After he had escaped from the battlefield on the other side, he rushed here. Without hesitation, he dashed and pounced at Sky River Great Elder, who was in the middle of the battle. Sky River Great Elder swept a glance at him, and similarly walked towards him. This part of the sky was tainted by crimson demonic light, as though doomsday had arrived. "Let's go," Yi Futian said as he turned and retreated. Today, the Holy Land of Taichu had initiated the battle to provoke this dispute. It was already too late for them to cease. Since they had already reached this stage, and their top figures were at a disadvantage, they could only try their hardest to escape unscathed. Although the Divine Palace had been sunk into the sea of the path, as long as the cultivators of the Divine Palace were still alive, the Divine Palace still existed. Currently, Yi Futian was most worried about the other battlefield. He did not know whether Emperor Nan could withstand his opponent. Sky River Great Elder and the white-robed cultivator of the Holy Land of Taichu instantly collided into one another. Astonishing destructive light swept out. Beyond the terrifying battle, Yi Futian and the others continued hastily escaping. "Don't let Yi Futian escape," a sinister voice sounded. In an instant the cultivators, who were originally dispersing in different directions, moved forwards one by one. They showed signs of gathering as they continued to hunt Yi Futian and his group. "Spread out," Yi Futian ordered. "Don't spread out. Their target is you," a cultivator objected decisively. If their group escaped in different directions, the cultivator was certain that all the opponents would chase after Yi Futian. After all, for those forces, killing Yi Futian was far more important than killing anyone else in their group. Palace Lord and Emperor Tsang are holding the fort in the Divine Palace. Emperor Nan is there too, Jiang Qingzi of the Celestial Gate of Vast Heaven analyzed. Even though they don't have an advantage in terms of numbers, they might not lose. It is enough to send away the first group of people from this battlefield. The rest of the cultivators should gather together. As long as none of the top figures come over here, We are capable of putting up a fight. The rest of them nodded in agreement. They were prepared to have a good fight anyway. All right. Yi Futian felt a warmth inside. He did not reject the good intentions of the others. He only hoped that the Divine Palace would not lose in its most important battle. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 1795 Under the Divine Sword. Chapter 1795 Under the Divine Sword. The cultivators of the Heavenly Mandate Academy continued escaping hastily. The white-robed elder rushed to delay Sky River Great Elder. Hence, the cultivators of the other forces continued to pursue Yi Futian's group. Even though Sky River Great Elder slaughtered many of their members, their lineup was still more powerful than that of Yi Futian's group. After all, they had gathered an extremely powerful army before they came over. They even included many forces of the higher heavens realm, such as Sky Burying God clan. They were in the same predicament as the cultivators of the Divine Palace. They all clearly knew that since they had reached this stage now, they had to act decisively. They could not depend on any element of luck. Only by eradicating the other party could they absolutely guarantee their own safety. They could not do anything about the battle between the top figures. However, this battlefield belonged to them. At the very least, they had to kill one person, Yi Futian from the Heavenly Mandate Academy. As long as Yi Futian was killed, the opponent's alliance would most likely face collapse. If that occurred, their opponent would pose less of a threat to them. The cultivators who were proficient in the Great Path of Space were the fastest in terms of speed. Many members of the forces like Shun Clan and Golden Divine Nation were proficient in this. Some of the figures at the peak of the Runhuang Plain were the first to catch up to Yi Futian's group. A top figure of Shun Clan cleaved down with his palm. In the distance, golden lightning appeared in the sky. It slashed the space apart and cleaved towards the crowd of cultivators. Another cultivator stepped forward, and his divine wheel of the Great Path appeared. Beams of divine light shot out and slaughtered their way to the crowd in the distance. Buzz! Gales swept past. A cultivator from Divine Palace's Sword Palace turned around and slashed up into the sky. Divine swords swept across the heavens, slashing towards the other party. It seemed as though it could tear apart the heavens and the earth. From all directions, other cultivators attacked, restricting Yi Futian's group from leaving. There were cultivators from Yi Futian's group that turned around, one after another, and joined the fight. Instantly, the arts of supreme attack of the Great Path constantly collided in the sky above the sea of the path. Ritual implements flew out in all directions. Divine lightning descended from the heavens. Golden divine light split the air, and swords of the Great Path cleaved the heavens. Countless attacks exploded, and waves churned on the sea of the path. The sea was wild and violent, and seemed as though it was roaring. Yi Futian's group kept advancing. Other people blocked off the raging storm of the Great Path for Yi Futian. These people had the most intense killing intent directed at him. They could even be considered resolute. All of them wanted him to die in the sea of the path. The person who led Yi Futian in his escape was the wife of Sky River Great Elder, the cultivator of Shun Clan, Shun Wuxia. She said to Yi Futian, "Although he has killed many cultivators, the number of our cultivators is still less than theirs. I will go and hold off some of them. All of you continue escaping. Their target is you. Escape as far away from the battlefield of upper-level Renhuangs as you can." "All right," Yi Futian said as he nodded his head. He did not say any more. Shun Luoxua turned around. Her Tianshan divine halo radiated and enveloped the endless space, cutting off the path of many cultivators pursuing them. Long story short, all of this occurred in a blink of an eye. Within this short amount of time, a huge battle exploded along the sea of the path. Currently, the number of cultivators that were advancing with Yi Futian had reduced by quite a bit. Yi Futian looked into the distance. The shore could be vaguely seen. They were close to reaching the land and fort. As talented figures, they moved at an incredible speed. There were fewer and fewer cultivators who were still hunting them, and those with a high plane of cultivation were few. Many of the opponents were engaged in battles with Yi Futian's alliance members. Cultivators from Shun clan, the Heavenly Mandate Academy, and various forces of the Heavenly Mandate realm participated in this battle. Many of them were giant figures in their respective territories. This battle could definitely be considered the largest battle in the 3,000 realms of the Great Path, since Donghuang the Great unified the Divine Prefecture. Many top forces and giant figures were involved in it, let alone in the 3,000 realms of the Great Path. The scale of this battle was most likely rare, even in the outer realms of the Divine Prefecture. This large-scale war erupted due to the current age of turmoil. Buzz! A gale swept past, and golden divine light dazzled. 3 upper-level Renhuangs continued to pursue Yi Futian. Jiang Qingzi was the only one left beside Yi Futian. On the contrary, on the opponent's team, not only were there 3 upper-level Renhuangs approaching them from 3 different directions, but there were also quite a few middle-level Renhuangs trailing them from a distance. A brilliant golden divine light sliced towards them. Jiang Qingzi guided Yi Futian to dodge the attack. The terrifying divine light darted past his body. It was only inches away from hitting him. "You should go," Yi Futian said to Jiang Qingzi. Jiang Qingzi looked at him. "I am capable of defending myself," Yi Futian said. Jiang Qingzi nodded. A domineering aura was unleashed. He swiftly turned around and pounced at a cultivator, who had an 8th-tier divine wheel. That was the most he could do for Yi Futian. Yi Futian glanced at him, and took a step forward in the air. He continued to move towards the shore.